When Joshua led Israel into the battle at Jericho, he told the Israelites that God wanted the city utterly destroyed and that no one was to take any spoils for themselves. Jericho was conquered, but one man of the Israelites, a man named Achan, rebelliously disobeyed God's clear command. He took a garment and some money for himself. What kind of impact did this act of defiance have on Achan's family? In today's forum, we'll see how a seemingly insignificant secret sin of just one man actually caused widespread suffering and pain throughout all of Israel.
The Philadelphia Church of God presents the Trumpet Daily.
When Israel began its conquest of the Promised Land during the days of Joshua, the very first monumental obstacle that they faced in their path was the stronghold of Jericho. I think all of you are familiar with this story. It was one of my favorites as a child, and it certainly has to be one of the more memorable scenes in the Bible when those massive walls of Jericho came tumbling down. God, as we know, miraculously intervened for Israel and simply gave them the city. And when he did, he also gave the Israelites some very specific instructions as to what to do when they took the city, when they conquered the city. He told them specifically that they were to avoid taking anything from the city for their own personal gain, because, as he said, the city shall be accursed. Let's look at Joshua chapter 7. To begin with here, he said, "The city shall be accursed, so I don't want you to take anything for yourselves. Just let it be buried." Now, at this point in the history, a man by the name of Achan probably never imagined that he'd commit such an abominable act as we're about to read about. He probably never thought that he was going to drift so far from God. In fact, when he heard those instructions initially, he probably thought to himself, well, of course, steer clear of it. I mean, this is all representative of sin and the sinful way of life, and I don't want any part of it. I want to keep me and my family away from it. But over time, something dreadfully wrong happened in that man's thinking. Over time, he weakened. Joshua 6, let's just pick it up at the end of the 6th chapter. It says, "So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout all the country." So the news of Jericho's fall spread throughout the region, spread across the land, and Joshua became famous for this incredible victory. And the people of Israel were feared in the nations round about them. The nations feared Israel and the God of Israel. Now, verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, "But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah," it says, "of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel." If you look at that phrase, committed a trespass there, it means to break faith. That's what it says in the Revised Standard Version. They broke faith. They broke their covenant with God, the family of Achan. And in many ways, for Achan, this seemed like the perfect crime. He was there standing in front of all of this wealth. No one was around him. He thought to himself, how could anyone possibly find out if I just grab some of this wealth for myself? How could anyone ever know about this crime, about this theft? In verses 2 through 3 there, you can see that the next city that Joshua intended to conquer was called the city of Ai. And it was about 12 miles from Jericho in the westerly direction. and it was considerably smaller than Jericho. And Joshua, though, had no intention of just passing this city, even if it seemed like it wasn't much of a threat, because God had given him instructions, go in and take the promised land, all of it. And so he sent out messengers or scouts to spy out the territory, and when they returned from Ai, they reported that this fortress there wasn't very large, it wasn't very strong, it wasn't very well fortified, and that it could probably be taken with just a few men. Verse 4 says, "So there went up there of the people about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai," it says, "smote them, about 36 men, for they chased them from before the gate, even unto Shebarim, and smote them in the going down. Wherefore the hearts of the people melted and became as water." I mean, the Israelite soldiers went into this confident as ever. They had just taken Jericho, after all. They went in just full of confidence, thinking that the Amorites would surely surrender without even a fight. But instead, they were overwhelmed by this small army. Instead, they were put to flight. What had happened? Where was God? Why didn't God give them the victory? That was the question that crossed many of their minds, and Joshua's too. And the great lesson that they were about to learn is that God's protection, God's intervention, God's victories depended on their obedience to God, depended on how well they followed God's instructions. Verse 7, it says, "And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore have you at all brought this people over Jordan? To deliver us into the hand of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would to God we had been content and dwelt on the other side, Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns their backs before their enemies for the Canaanites? And all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall environ us around, and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do unto your great name?" Joshua was discouraged. He even tried to blame God here. And God told him very quickly, "Look, get up from off of your knees. There is sin in Israel. There is sin that you need to find out about and take care of." These events that had transpired at Ai, they didn't happen because of any unfaithfulness on God's part. It was the unfaithfulness of Achan and his family. Verse 10, "And the Lord said unto Joshua, Get you up, wherefore lie you thus upon your face? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them, for they have even taken of the accursed thing, and have also stolen, and dissembled also, and they have put it even among their own stuff." I mean, Joshua must have been just surprised and shocked that this went on under his nose, that someone, after hearing such clear, precise instructions, could go it alone, grab the loot, bury it in the tent. So God instructed Joshua here to tell the people what had happened, and to tell them that they would not again claim victory until the guilty party was removed, until the sin was found out and removed from out of the camp. My father wrote an article on this chapter back in 2000 in the Trumpet magazine. He said, "There is a giant lesson here. When we stop winning our battles, sin is the cause." We're all fighting, aren't we? We're all engaged in war. We're all battling our adversary. And what is it? When we start losing battles, what is that a sure sign of? Well, that sin is the cause, as he said there. This lesson was for ancient Israel, but applies even more today. If you break faith, you will begin to lose your spiritual battles. That's what Achan did. He broke faith. He lied. He coveted. He followed on that lust and took for himself. My father concluded, there is cause and effect. True education revolves around learning cause and effect. There was a reason why they didn't win. There was a reason why they were overwhelmed. Achan's sin also teaches us another vital spiritual lesson, and that is how that one individual's sin surely does affect the entire family, the entire nation. Achan's sin affected everyone. As I said, he thought it was the perfect crime. He thought it wouldn't hurt anybody. He thought nobody would notice. It was just going to be buried in the ground after all. But Israel, the entire nation of Israel, was made to suffer because of what he did, because of the way that he reasoned, because of what he stole and took for himself. It did impact the rest of the people. I mean, we can't slip into the thinking that what we do by ourselves is somehow just going to impact only us. Sin spreads. The Bible likens it to leaven, which fills the whole lump. It makes the entire loaf rise, just a little pinch of it. Verse 12, it says, "Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they were accursed. Neither will I be with you any more, except you destroy the accursed from among you." See, either we get rid of the sin, either we remove the sin. Now, we all have sins to get rid of, but that's the task for a Christian, day in and day out, to identify it and to remove it. And if we stop doing that, God will stop fighting our battles for us. God will stop leading us to victory. God will stop intervening on our behalf. We've got to remove sin. Now, as I said, obviously we all battle weaknesses and sins every day, and this passage is primarily talking about the more blatant, rebellious act that violates God's clear instructions. But to be sure, day in and day out, I mean, we've got to be examining ourselves, our minds, our thoughts, to make sure that they align with God's. Verse 19 says, "And Joshua said unto Achan, My son, give, I pray you, glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession unto him, and tell me now what you have done. Hide it not from me." And Achan answered Joshua and said, "Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel. And thus have I done. When I saw," notice this, "when I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them, and took them. And behold, they are hid in the earth, in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it." See, it was just too much for him to resist. It was right there for the taking. It was free.